Hello and welcome to the Night Owl Philanthropy podcast, What's Your Why? I'm your host, Dean Jones, and in this series, I ask charity leaders and change makers to share their why, the purpose, experience, and values that drive their work. And each episode goes beyond job titles and campaigns to uncover the real stories behind social impact leadership, exploring what it takes to stay resilient, purposeful, and compassionate in a demanding sector. Today, I'm joined by Steve Phillip, founder and director of the Jordan Legacy CIC, member of One Voice, One Hope, and an innovation partner with the National Suicide Prevention Network, backed by the Royal Foundation of the Prince and Princess of Wales. The Jordan Legacy is working towards a zero suicide society by sparking open conversations, practical training, and collaborative action to prevent preventable suicides. Steve, thank you so much for joining me. Let's start, as we always do on this podcast, with that central question. What is your why? When someone asks, why suicide prevention? Why a zero suicide society? How do you answer in your own words?
Yeah, thank you, Dean. Firstly, for inviting me on, and as you introduced all that I'm involved with, I suddenly realised why I feel so tired at the end of every week. My why is a passion. Through losing my own son Jordan at age 34 to suicide in December of 2019, a subject I knew very little about, I have to say, at the time. But I very quickly came to the realization of just how many people are impacted by suicide deaths. It is the biggest killer of men under 50 in the UK. It is the biggest killer of men and women under the age of 35. That's not road traffic accidents, not cancer, not diabetes or heart attacks. The biggest threat, I suppose, to someone under 35 is themselves at the moment. And we make reference quite often to looking to move towards a zero suicide society. That's not because we have a belief that every suicide is preventable, but actually all the research and evidence suggests that most are. It is one of the most preventable deaths in society. So really on that basis alone, why wouldn't we want to try and get as close to zero as possible? And that is really what our work through the Jordan Legacy in collaboration with others is all about.
Great, thank you. And for listeners who may not know you yet or haven't heard of you, how do you yourself introduce yourself and explain what the Jordan Legacy is all about? You've touched on some of those themes, but can you go into a bit more detail?
Yeah, it's really an interesting conversation to have at dinner parties and in business networking events because there's only so many times I suppose you could be introduced as the suicide guy. Not to put too fine a point on it, it's a conversation. It's still quite difficult for a lot of people to have. But really, in terms of our work, you kind of alluded to this somewhat in the introduction there, Dean. It is to do whatever we can collaboratively with others to move towards or closer to this zero suicide society. Now, we do that through collaboration and partnerships with others. You mentioned the Royal Foundation of the Prince and Princess of Wales. We're an innovation partner with them. We formed a national collaborative network called One Voice, One Hope, working alongside many of those, the Three Dads Walking and others that will be well-known names in the suicide prevention space to many of your listeners. But through really education, through awareness raising, that can be through talk in schools and workplaces and other community groups, and through fairly active social media presence as well. We really just want to educate and break down the stigma as much as possible around suicide, so that it becomes a conversation that people feel more comfortable having, which in turn helps those who have maybe really struggled to have that conversation because they're feeling suicidal to actually be able to open up and talk about their feelings.
Mm. Are you able, if it's okay to ask this question, are you able to take us back to December 2019? What happened on that day, and how did the world change for you?
Yes, gosh, this is a question I've asked a lot. I talk about a lot, and through the talks I deliver in workplaces, it's invariably where the talk start. My background, just for context, I'd worked in senior management in the automotive industry for some 25 years in North America and the UK. Got involved in consultancy and actually was a director of a leadership and management training company, but fell into the world of social media back in 2009. And that saw me for the next 11 and a half years running my own social media training practice and consultancy. So that takes us to December the 4th of 2019, and on that day, I was actually in the Midlands in Solihull, delivering a Facebook workshop actually to a group of senior managers for the International Motors Group. Jordan, my son, he was diagnosed, just to add some further context, diagnosed 4.5 years prior to that with clinical anxiety and depression. I think the first time there was a recognition that Jordan had an illness. We clearly realized he struggled with various things at various times, and it's easy sometimes to suggest, well, that's just Jordan, that's just the way he is. But this was the first time we'd had a clinical diagnosis. But as we approached the latter part of 2019, he was clearly really struggling and quite depressed about a number of things. And we were probably in touch far more often as a result. So the evening before I was delivering this workshop in Solihull, I'd driven down from Newcastle upon Tyne, a couple of 100 miles journey. I've been delivering a talk there previous day. Got to my hotel middle of the evening. Jordan and I were due to speak. And just to touch base, really. And I WhatsApped him, just said, "How are you doing?" I said, "Just arrived at the hotel. It's been a long drive. Would you still like a catch up?" Now, I'm really honest, Dean. There's part of me fairly tired. I was hoping he said, "Look, I'm okay, Dad. I'm fine. You've had a long day," and that's exactly how he responded. Uh,
Mm.
he said, "Look, it sounds like you've had a long day. I'm feeling pretty tired myself. Didn't sleep well the night before. That was up till 2 a.m. Is it all right if we catch up another time?" I tell the story countless times, really do. And this moment of reliving that is just because that was the last conversation I had with John.
Mm.
And it wasn't a conversation, it was a WhatsApp exchange. And I would keep a screen grab of that, and I put that up on a slide for my talks. And I ask people, is there anything there in that conversation that would have given you any warning signs that
Mm.
what was about to happen would happen? And everybody goes, no, there's nothing. Perfectly normal conversation. So I delivered the workshop the following day. I leave at 4 o'clock, the offices, I get into my car in the car park, just sort one or two things out. And at 4:22, I get an incoming call from Jordan's partner and girlfriend. And unusual maybe for her to call me, but nothing that would have caused any kind of sense of alarm for me. And all I remember was, I know the call is logged at 2 minutes duration. I remember about the first 20 seconds, really, as she just kept apologizing and just saying, it's Jordan, he's killed himself. And that moment obviously etched in my mind and psyche forever. And as you kind of alluded to a moment ago, my world just changed in that instant, really. So really, I was faced with being 100 and odd miles away from home, due to drive back 3 hours plus whatever it would take to get back to Harrogate in North Yorkshire. Um, but I remember just getting out of the car, walking back into the offices. I just come out of seeing the receptionist at this huge atrium with a hallway to the offices there, the International Motors Group, and she smiled, looked at me, and just say, "Okay, what are you doing back?" And I think she clocked my face, um, and yeah, just came over and realised something was very seriously wrong. And they looked after me really, really well, but even offered a driver to drive me back home. But my initial reaction was, how can I possibly have some poor soul sitting next to me while I've got to make the calls on hands-free that I've got to make and deal in my own way with the news that I've just received. So I actually did drive home, and to by which time a lot of family had gathered, and Jordan's girlfriend and everybody. So yeah, that was the start of it, really.
Mm.
Dean, just somebody dropped a bomb in our world, and you immediately try and just pick up the pieces in whatever way you can do at that moment.
Um, First of all, thank you so much for sharing that story. And I'm conscious that you may have shared it a number of times in the last 5 or 6 years. I don't imagine for a second that it gets any easier to share it.
No, you're right. Right.
And I
Mm.
think you probably hear this from a lot of people that speak to you, that it's difficult from my perspective to know how to respond to that sort of thing. But I think that's what this conversation's actually all about, really, isn't it? And it's how we respond, and then how we like move forward. And you're trying to do something as a result of that, what happened, that turns it into something, I suppose, positive. If you can,
Yeah, I
in
mean,
the day.
sorry, I was going to say there's a phrase that's used that I got to learn a lot about afterwards, called post-traumatic growth. That is something
Okay.
not a term I'd come across before, but I've heard a lot since, and it is true. I've spoken to many people, whether they've been in war situations or lost somebody in the circumstances that I have, or other means, that there are so many people that out of that go on to do quite
Mm,
remarkable things, and
mm,
the collective term is post-traumatic growth.
mm. And obviously, the name I've given this podcast is what is your why? And this really, I'm assuming from that point, from that 2019, December 29 onwards, your why fundamentally changed in every way from that point. And in the days and weeks and months after Jordan's death, what kept you from staying stuck in grief, and what first nudged you towards creating something in his name? And actually, a question to add on to that is, do you ever really stop grieving? Have you stopped grieving? But
Yeah, well,
I'll
there's
leave the
a
question there.
lot to unpick there, isn't there?
Yeah,
It is, but thank you for
yeah,
asking. So
yeah,
I think firstly, let's put this into context by responding to a question I'm often asked by people who find themselves, unfortunately, in the situation I am, and because of the work I do now, will often reach out to me and ask me that question: how do you move on? How do you move on with this? Because I'm just
yeah.
devastated. I don't know what to do.
Mm,
Because each person's grief is very different,
mhm,
and each person's suicide experience is very, very different. There is always one common recovery point that I move toward in that conversation, and I just say, the one thing I know is that if you can find a sense of purpose, whatever that is
mm,
for you, right
mm,
now it might be getting out of bed for the first time in 2 weeks and
mm,
going downstairs to make a cup of tea.
mm,
It might be going out for a walk. It might be setting up a charity. It certainly doesn't have to be, but you have to find something, because if you
mm.
don't, it will consume you.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think I've talked about this quite a lot. Thing that said I know I had a choice. I had a choice to kind of sit on the sofa with a bottle.
Mm,
Very appealing choice, I have to say.
mm,
Nothing was, in terms of business work, anything was going to interest me at that time. Or I could get up and do something. And I think it was probably just inherent in my nature that I was always going to get up and choose the latter rather than the former. And in terms of that decision to do something in Jordan's memory and his legacy, as the Jordan legacy as it became, it's really interesting. I'm co-writing a book at the moment, and as part of that process, I've had to look back through the journals that I wrote at the time. Um, Mentally, in my head, my memory told me that we first started talking about the Jordan legacy several months after the event. And yet I could see that within a matter of weeks, only 3 or 4 weeks, the name, the Jordan legacy, had already been written down on a sheet of paper in the journal there. So this was something I obviously started to think about. So if you
Mm.
remember, as I said earlier, my knowledge of mental health and suicide was absolutely ground zero. I couldn't even
Right.
have told you had I experienced anybody who lost someone to suicide, or other than what I'd seen in the media. But I very quickly started to consume content, read books, watched information, spoke to people that were reaching out. Because one of the things I did, which was a partially cathartic exercise and one to try and get some answers to some questions, was I published an article on LinkedIn 3 weeks after Jordan's death. Remember, my background was in social media. LinkedIn was a platform I was very comfortable with and knew well. And the article was called "The Day My Son Took His Own Life," and it shared the events in more depth than probably I've shared, with you here, what happened, how I felt, what we were going through. And it had a huge response globally, this article. People like Ariana Huffington from the HuffPost emailing me, and all kinds of people. And that kind of, in a way, cemented the beginning of my journey. There was almost no turning back, because people started reaching out. People started saying, "This is my experience," and obviously a lot of sympathy for what we'd gone through. But I started to hear their stories and their journeys, and started probably the first time to understand the scale of suicide deaths. So we lose more than 700,000 people globally. One person every 40 seconds dies
Wow.
by suicide somewhere in the world. Um, and once I started to learn just where the issues were, so many of these are in the Western world, in supposedly pretty stable societies and
Yeah.
systems. Um, I think I kind of knew instinctively that I wasn't going back to my social media consultancy business. And if there was a way to be able to continue um, doing something purposeful, I could do it in Jordan's memory, really, and legacy, as someone who didn't recognize the signs myself. Too late to say Jordan, but could I make a make a difference? I was starting to learn very quickly that the articles and the posts that I was sharing were making that difference, because people would respond to me and say, "Look, as a result of what you've shared, I was considering ending my life. I'm not now because." And as soon as I started to get those messages, I think I kind of knew what I was going to do, really. In terms of grief, the question you asked me as well was, am I still experiencing grief? I think that's a really interesting question, because uh, I mentioned a bit earlier that grief is very different for different people. I know that I experienced, in the weeks and months after George's death, symptoms of PTSD as part of the grief. I would have violent head twitches. I could be just sitting watching the television. My head would just twitch from one side to another really violently. I would have body convulsions almost. I remember my wife literally holding me down in bed at night. Um, I don't experience that trauma anymore. There are moments under stress where those head twitches that were never part of my life before come back. So there's a legacy in that respect. Um, but I don't experience the trauma anymore. I don't experience, for the majority of the times, overwhelming sadness or anything like that at all. But there are just those moments that they just come out of nowhere.
Mm.
And I don't even mean, talking here. We're naturally reliving the event. Um, there are moments of emotion that come through talking about that. But there are just moments. You could be watching something on television. You could be just in thought. Um, it just comes out of nowhere, and I think the way that I've dealt with my grief, in inverted commas, and some may say I've hidden away from it by doing what I'm doing.
Mm.
But I know others I've spoken to feel the same way, and that is by immersing myself in talking about Jordan every day, and doing the work that I'm doing. I've not been able to sit and dwell, if that makes sense. Now, I have a ritual. I'm going to say now, I'm not a religious person. I'm not a particularly spiritual person. You kind of hope there's something there, or I do, but I'm somebody who needs evidence of that. But every morning, sitting right behind me in my office here, was a picture frame you can just see over my
Mm.
shoulder. It's about 12 photographs of Jordan and I on a trip we took together to the Amalfi Coast in Italy in 2015, just shortly after he was first diagnosed with clinical anxiety and depression. We had a wonderful time. Every morning before I sit down at my desk here, and every night before I go to bed, I come over and I have a conversation with Jordan about the day. And I've done that every day. And I still do. My wife knows. She's downstairs. Get away. Get upstairs. I'll switch the lights off and I'll have that conversation. And I do that every day. And does that keep Jordan alive in my head in some way? I think it probably does. Or why do I do it? Because I know if I miss that for any reason, there's a feeling of guilt,
Mm-hmm.
which is odd to explain. So grief is really interesting. It just manifests itself in different ways. But by continuing to do the work that I do, continuing to speak to him in the way I do, there's a part of him still remains, I suppose, for me. That if I just stepped away from everything, I don't know quite how I deal with that. So I keep going. Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Um, Before the Jordan legacy existed, and before everything that happened in 29 happened, what was life like as a consultant, as speaker, father, and I guess how did this shatter and reshape those foundations?
Yeah, well, I had a varied career in some respects, but the social media work that I've been doing for 11 and a half years, worked well. For me, I was running my own business. So I was earning a pretty reasonable income from that. I enjoyed speaking and running the sessions that I did, but I was reaching a point where I thought, well, coming up at that point, I was coming up to early 60s, just had my 60th birthday in 2019, and thought, right, we need to turn towards retirement, really, and whatever that looks like. I was never going to stop working, but maybe I'll just do more speaking or do something. And I towards the end of the year, just engaged actually in November of 2019, a consultant that was going to work with me in the new year to look at how we take the business that I had and scale that and maybe not franchise it, but under license maybe. So I could take a step back, but continue the principles of what I taught and how I taught it. So immediately, of course, Jordan's death changed that.
Mm.
That was never going to happen. I was not going to, I pretty well knew immediately I wasn't going to continue.
Mm.
But also, if we cast our memory back to 2020, we were just weeks away from the COVID pandemic. Of course, we wouldn't know that at the time. So what happened was I was forced into really taking a step back from my consultancy business anyway.
Mm.
So whatever you might like to call it, some might call it fate,
Yeah.
dealt a hand at that moment and said, well, you can't run your consultancy business, certainly not in the way you were doing.
Mm.
Maybe this is the time to step back anyway and look at where you want to go. So a number of factors kind of came together really, but the COVID pandemic and lockdowns were pretty influential in that transition, I think.
Is there any alignment at all? And I don't know if it's a good thing to go back to go before a before Jordan period of your life or not. But is there any alignment between what your why might have been back then before Jordan took his life and what it is now, or are they completely different? Would you be able to put your finger on what your why was prior to what happened with Jordan?
No, yes, that's a really good question because I know I am a very different person. I think I pursued most of my life trying to be successful, whatever
Yeah,
that meant.
yeah.
Seem to remember saying I was going to be a millionaire by the time I was 20.
Mm.
But that didn't happen by 30 and still wasn't happening by 40.
Mhm.
And I maybe started to question that
Mm.
aspiration. But in all I knew was I enjoyed doing what I was doing. I wanted to be financially stable. But there's no real why, no real purpose.
Mm.
I think I was very self-absorbed in a lot of the things that I did
Mm,
as well. Busy,
mm,
constantly busy.
mm,
And I think, although I'm busy, probably more busy than I've ever been in my life now,
mm,
I think my attitude to life, my attitude toward people, a level of compassion
mm.
and empathy that I think I had. I think I always had a reasonable level of emotional intelligence,
Yeah,
but that ramped up significantly following Jordan's
yeah.
death, I think, really. So yeah, so I think there wasn't really any great alignment before. I think there was the basis. I think everything I'd learned through life, Dean, and in funny enough, what I'd learned through business and what I'd learned through leadership and management, what I'd learned through professional coaching, and what I learned through social media all lent itself to what I do now. Because all those skill sets and traits I use in what I'm doing today with the Jordan legacy.
There are so many questions I want to ask you, and I think one of the questions that keeps popping up in my head, and it's not part of this, the questions that I'd necessarily planned to ask you, but given you the nature of your role as a consultant and a focus there specifically on social media, back in 2009, I think you mentioned, which was as things were kind of not emerging, they'd emerged, but it was the very early stages of things like Facebook and that sort of thing.
Well, Twitter was 3 years old, I think,
Right.
at that point.
Yeah.
So very early days. Yeah.
Yeah. And I hear when people are talking about subjects like suicide and well-being and mental health that social media it has a lot to answer for in regards to how people feel about themselves. Um, what do you think about that? How do you, given your background and what's happened, and now you use social media, I would say, in a very positive way to convey positive messages and to change and make change for the better. But equally, at the same time, there's this constant flow of information that might be doing exactly the opposite of that. Do you have any views on that at all?
Oh, yeah, I have huge views, and I've got to know, some pretty significant people in this field, like Ian Russell, Molly Russell's father,
Yeah.
campaigner, but very much in the media, following the death of her son Jules, to what we and she believes was
Mm,
as a result of a TikTok challenge online in his bedroom. So it's a subject, yeah, we're very immersed in, um, and I think my views really on it are, and shared probably by a lot of other people, is that social media itself isn't inherently bad,
hmm
but there are bad actors within social media, and those bad actors, unfortunately, are the very tech companies that have developed the social media platforms. Now, what I mean by that
mm,
um, is that in the very early days, some of the tech entrepreneurs, they were in their younger days back there, openly embraced what they were doing as anti-government, anti-legislation, this freedom of speech, this world where the government couldn't come in, and this was a place for us all to share whatever we wanted to.
mm,
Now, what's happening now is that that's coming back to bite everybody, including them. And I think what we've got now is are platforms that could be used and are used for good,
hmm
and sharing and connecting and are lifelines for many people. But we've also got the very same platforms that are allowing content that is harmful
hmm
to be shared, and worse than that, to be almost through design deliberately fed to people that are consuming that harmful content. And sadly, that is young people
mm,
in the main.
mm,
What there doesn't seem to be, although there are changes afoot with the online safety bill, and Ofcom and the work that they're doing, that needs to get stronger, it needs to develop. But what we need is for the tech companies to be truly held accountable for the content that is being shared online. And it would seem that they're trying to evade that as much as possible, not helped by certain premiers in certain countries who seem also to consider the freedom of speech should be put above the safety
mm.
of people using these platforms.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, this subject is so huge, isn't it? There's so many different areas you can talk about. But at the very beginning of our conversation, you talked about suicide as a major issue amongst men under the age of 50. You'll have a very clear idea of what the statistics are there in terms of those in that sort of age group. Is there any correlation between men of that age and social media, or are those actually two separate things? Because we talked about young people being affected and influenced, and I wouldn't necessarily put the word young people with somebody in their sort of 40s up to 50s who might want to take their life. So is there a direct link? I'm assuming that they interact in one way, but
There are a lot of causations, really, Dean. And I think one of the things that, I had to learn very early on, my first understanding of suicide in the days and weeks following Jordan's death was probably shared by many people, that it was a mental illness. This is what it was. It was a biological process.
mm,
What I now know is that suicide is a combination of biological factors, socioeconomic factors, physical and mental ill health. And it could be a combination of those things for any one person. So you could look at males, for example, in the age group we're talking about, and saying, well, in some cases, social media would have been a contributing factor. That could
mhm,
be anything from body dysmorphia to envy, bullying,
mm,
anything at all. But then you
mm,
could also look at gambling. You could look at
yeah,
financial
mm,
difficulties. You could look at alcoholism. You
mm,
could look at toxic masculinity, or So social media will not be the influence on men. It is very much more complex,
mm,
and very much speaks about men's role in society,
mm,
and that changing role, and how many men feel ill-equipped to really thrive in that society today, based on the fact they're living up to expectations from previous generations
mhm,
as well.
mm,
So it's very multifaceted, very very complex.
mm,
But no, I wouldn't point to social media specifically
mm,
for the suicide statistics for males under 50.
yeah. So, at what point would you say you moved from someone who felt you should do something about suicide because of its direct impact on you as a father, and obviously on Jordan as the victim of that act, and then moving to I have to do something, because I'm assuming you're in that point and mindset where actually you feel I have to do something. Is that right? Rather than want to.
Yeah, yeah. I think this happened within months. I think the Jordan Legacy is a registered community interest company, and within the next few months, we're now putting a submission in to move to full charitable status.
Mhm.
The CIC was actually registered in August, so it was 7 or 8 months later of 2020.
Yeah.
So that was it being officially incorporated, but we were already starting within the summer and spring of 2020. So yeah, I'd already decided very early on. The more I learned, I started to understand and thought about, what are the skill sets that I have? What are the tools that I have available to me? Social media knowledge, my coaching background, leadership and management skills. All I can apply these now.
Mm.
So it was pretty quick. I think it was pretty quick, really, and that is often the case with people that have done similar to me.
Yeah. And what gap or gaps did you see in the system in sort of conversations, training, or collaboration that the Jordan legacy itself could fill that perhaps other organisations weren't doing as much of, or enough of?
I think it wasn't so much whether Jordan Legacy could fill those gaps. It was how could we facilitate the filling of the gaps, which might sound like the same thing, but we very quickly recognised that we've got almost three worlds. We've got the what we call the professional services side of mental health and suicide, the NHS services. We've got the government on the one hand, and we've got the third sector, or the charitable organisations. Now, I think most wouldn't disagree with the fact that the third sector picks up a huge amount of what's going on out there and eases a huge burden off the NHS, and the NHS have been hugely overwhelmed. So we realised that there were some real issues within the professional services in being able to cope
Mm-hmm.
with what was going on. So that's one clear area. But then the other gaps that we started to recognize were that there was just this lack of education, this lack of knowledge. I had no idea or no inkling that Jordan might be considering suicide.
Mm.
With the knowledge I have now and reflections back on his behaviors, his conversations, language, I should have absolutely known. But the toolkit that I had then was nowhere near the toolkit that I have now. So we recognized there was a need to equip parents, schools, workplaces with a knowledge, a fundamental knowledge. Nobody gets in a car these days, in most cases, and doesn't put a seatbelt on. Okay. Not because they think they're going to get into an accident.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody says, "Oh, I better put my seatbelt on because I might get into an accident when I get around the corner." They do it because it's instinct. They know if that should happen,
Mm-hmm.
I've got a seatbelt on. So I was, we've been educated to understand that.
Mm-hmm.
We're educated that smoking is bad for our health, and lots of people have quit smoking as a result. So we want, suicide, that gap of education is really important to say, statistically, it's highly unlikely you're going to be impacted by suicide. Certainly of somebody close to you, but it can happen to anyone. So kind of statistically, fairly low chance you're going to get in a car accident, but it can happen to you. So the education gap was massive. And I think the final gap that we've increasingly come to recognize, and why we're doing the work we're doing through One Voice, One Hope, a collaborative network, is that everybody seemed to be working in silos. They were either working in a small group somewhere regionally, but they weren't sharing their knowledge more widely than that, and they weren't accessing knowledge more widely than that. Or they were just trying their best as a small charitable organization, quite often a grassroots charity, to do whatever they can, burning themselves out in the process, and maybe lasting 1 or 2 or 3 years before they say, I can't do this anymore. So we recognize one of the biggest gaps was in collaboration and joining up all the dots, and not just amongst charitable organizations, but saying, well, why aren't charitable organizations working more closely with the NHS and vice versa? Why aren't they sharing knowledge, resources? It happens. It does happen in silos, and it works really, really well. Why aren't we doing that more broadly? So I think for us, that is the biggest gap and the biggest area of focus for us and the Jordan legacy going forward is how do we facilitate the joining up of the dots and better collaboration?
Just to take it back just as a step, can you put your finger on why charitable organizations don't collaborate as much as we'd like to see them collaborating? Sometimes I feel like the system's set up to prevent that from happening because we're incentivized to pitch against one another for grants and that sort of thing, or to get people's attention. And if you talk about social media, we want to get the biggest, clearest message out to have the biggest impact on our audience and win that crowd over who would otherwise give their funds to somebody else. That's how I see it. What's your answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, when immediately you asked the question, I mean, to anyone just listening to this on audio, they wouldn't have seen the smile appear on my face as you asked that question, because the reasons are, firstly, the system is set up for us to be competitive. Funding for grants and the likes. We're all struggling for funding to keep going. So naturally, the system forces us into that competitive space. Really, there is another side. And I use this term a lot. It doesn't always go down well with everybody, but I use it a lot, and that is we need to let go of our ego.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is ego in the sense that, if you speak to an organization and say, would you be happy to share this and share it for free? You can kind of go, oh, okay, I'm not, we put a lot of work in this, a lot of years in, it's kind of our IP. But if you were to share it collaboratively with other people, wouldn't cost you anything to do that, by the way. And that saved more lives. Would that not be a good thing? Yeah, can we have a think about that? I hear what you say, and it's this. Well, this is this is ours. We've developed this. But at the Jordan Legacy, we just have a completely different attitude. We're constantly. My daughter Danielle, who we haven't mentioned this, Jordan's sister has worked with me over the last 4 years, 5 years now, and regularly shares other people's content and their campaigns and their charities in something she calls a spotlight on hope. She's done that all the time through the Jordan legacy. We just thought, well, why not? Why wouldn't we do that?
I think that's something that should be talked up. I think it's something that we should celebrate more and be more prepared to kind of spotlight when that happens, because I completely agree. So much could be gained from collaborating with these predominantly amazing individuals who've got this, as you have, these incredible skills from their previous, work lives and things like that. Imagine what could be achieved through collaboration. Yeah, I think. Thank you for.
Oh,
touching on that.
no, it's absolutely huge. But that to me is the big gap, and one of the biggest things I think. If you say, what could make a difference, because we are seeing all kinds of deaths in society trending downwards. Road traffic accidents I've mentioned, and breakthroughs in medical science, seeing reductions in certain types of cancers. We're seeing a lot of positives in the world of health. But suicide numbers, firstly, up until 2023, had stagnated for 20 years and not seen any downward movement. And then we started to see an upward trend.
Yeah.
So we're not seeing these numbers moving back, and we need to do something significant in our society if we are to see numbers move on a downward trend.
I'm really interested in trends and that kind of thing. Is in your experience, have you been able to find any link between that point at which increases were starting to being noticed and things that were happening in society, or things that are happening around those individuals, that directly links those two things happening?
Yeah, I think if you understand what leads someone to consider suicide, it's a combination of, let's say, biological, socioeconomic, physical, mental health issues that can lead someone to feel a sense of defeat and humiliation. Someone who's been involved in gambling addiction, for example, could reach a point of feeling humiliated, defeated, can't see any way out. And once that leads to any sense of entrapment, where they just think there is no way out of that, and that leads to hopelessness, and the volitional factors are available, i.e. I'm more predisposed to react or respond, or to drink and maybe react and respond without how to drink, or the means are just there for me. If any of those volitional factors exist, then that's the point at which somebody may act on their suicidal thoughts. So what are some of those causations that can, and trends that we talk about? Financial crisis. You will always see in a major economic financial crisis an correlative increase in deaths by suicide, with a percentage decline in the standards of living as well. So we know financial major economic downturns. Got the actual word I'm looking for here. Recession. Yeah, at times of recession, suicide numbers increase. So we know those trends. We looked at COVID as an example. I think there was a lot of thoughts and speculation, and even suggestion that during COVID, suicide numbers increased. They didn't, actually. During that 2-year lockdown period, in fact, we saw a few percentage drop. And one of the reasons for that.
It's so interesting you say that, because as you were talking about it, I was thinking about how I felt during COVID. And for me in particular, and lots of others, it gave me an opportunity to divert my attention towards things that I actually really enjoyed doing. And I remember feeling that was something positive for me. And I was taking seriously those opportunities to go for that long walk, for the hour, and actually feeling enriched by that process of going out and seeing nature and feeling nature. So I'm not that surprised that that is what we've seen, because I felt
we also became better connected, didn't we? We were looking out for our neighbours. We were doing things that we all stopped doing afterwards, which I thought was going to happen, and it did. So I think what we're seeing now are trends where we're seeing the legacy, for example, of increased suicides in young people. Yeah, because of the challenges that they face with not being able to go to school and the pressures that they're facing. We're seeing the legacy of that now. We're seeing the legacy of long COVID, and physical illnesses. So we're starting to see some legacies coming out of COVID now, some 2 or 3 years later, that are influencing an increase in suicide deaths as well.
It's a complex picture generally, isn't it? It's a kind of
Well, it's
yeah.
hugely complex.
Mm,
I think, somebody I follow a lot and have got to know and meet, Professor Rory O'Connor from the University of Glasgow, wrote a book called When It's Darkest. A phenomenal book, really, on understanding suicide. He talks very often, or is asked the question, can we predict that someone will die by suicide? And he often says, our ability to predict suicide is probably no more than chance very often.
mm,
But what we can do to prevent suicides, going right back to what I said at the beginning, our mission to prevent really all preventable suicides,
mm,
that's to us what a zero suicide is.
yeah.
If we're all willing and able to do that, is what we do upstream.
Mm,
It is how we equip our children at school and in their early days to thrive in
hmm
that environment and not be put under academic pressures to the extent that they feel defeated,
hmm
humiliated, and trapped.
mm,
What we do in our society to deal with the homelessness, to deal with addictions, to deal with all those societal pressures, financial pressures. It's what we do upstream will ultimately have the greatest impact on reducing deaths by suicide. Unfortunately, where our focus has been and still is today is at the crisis end.
yeah.
Sadly, that is often too late
Yeah.
for many people. So we have to shift our thinking and spend 80% of our time, I think, on the upstream solutions.
So we're at that point, I think, and the points you're mentioning link nicely to my next question, which is about the Jordan legacy and how it works in human terms. So for someone listening who's never encountered your work, can you paint a picture of what the Jordan legacy does day to day, the workshops, the conversations and the collaborations, and how you're both addressing the upstream work that you've referred to and the immediate kind of crisis work, I suppose, which is the only way I can think of describing it, but you'll have a better way, no doubt.
Yeah. Yeah. So what the Jordan Legacy doesn't do, or maybe we'll explain that first of all, we're not a crisis line, a helpline where we don't deliver frontline services of any kind. So our work is primarily education. It's about going out and delivering the talks that we do, is facilitating workshops. And it is about raising awareness through our social media channels, hosting quarterly panel discussion events where we bring experts in, and we have a wide range and an ever-growing range of help and resources on our website for
Hmm.
all aspects of mental health and suicide. So that's our core of the Jordan legacy. But what we've undertaken since 2025, really early, is the formation of a collaborative network called One Voice, One Home. So
Hmm.
we've spearheaded that. And what that's doing is, through initially around about a dozen different advocates who came together volunteering, as the Jordan legacy is volunteering for One Voice, One Home. We're creating a movement that is going to join those dots that I talked about earlier on. So through the creation of themed collaborative action groups, which could be a theme, could be education, it could be workplaces, it could be online safety, it could be emergency services, something we're working on at the moment. We're forming collaborative action groups to identify existing and emerging solutions to preventing suicides, how they can be implemented on the ground
Mm.
across the 4 nations of the UK,
Mm.
not just in a particular area. We're also developing, as part of that One Voice, One Hope movement, an online resource hub that we're calling the Good Practices Hub,
Hmm.
which will be a repository for any examples of emerging good practice and existing good practice that is working, delivering results, doesn't need to be academically, supported, but it would be somewhere that if somebody like me, taking me back now 6 years, 5.5 years, starting the Jordan legacy, said, right, I want to do something here. It's suicide prevention related. I don't know where to start.
Mm.
There's a good practices hub here of other people that have done similar things.
Mm.
Let me go and have a look. Let me learn from them.
Mm.
So that is probably our biggest piece of legacy work that we're going to be doing over the next to 10 years really is developing this collaborative network. And well, the measure will be, I think, in 5 years to say, has there been a significant downturn in suicide deaths? Could we say it was down to One Voice, One Hope and what the Jordan legacy has spearheaded? Or will we just simply have to look and say, well, what happened in those 5 years that might have created this landscape where suicide numbers have come down? And if we can say, well, One Voice, One Hope was happening during that time, maybe we could just claim a little bit of the credit for that. But if we have truly created a collaborative network where people feel their voices have been heard, which is often not the case, and they feel they're in a safe and supported space, then that alone will have been something that I think we could be proud of, really.
Absolutely, yeah. It's all contributing one way or another. I think you mentioned right at the beginning about where you were in your age and stage at the point at which Jordan took his life, that you were kind of nearing that point of finding a consultant to take on your business so that you could kind of look towards retirement. And is there a sense with you in terms of what you want to achieve through the charity, what will be a charity in not too long, hopefully, where you feel that time's against you? Because obviously with all of these things, it's an ever moving feast, isn't it? It's never going to go away, and so the structures that need to be put in place need to be resilient and also sustainable, and have some kind of opportunity to the engines need to keep turning and the wheels need to keep turning. So are you thinking about that in terms of how you create a structure that has a legacy to? I think you mentioned the word legacy, and the legacy's in the name of the charity.
I think that realistically, I have to do, Dean. I think there's no question about that. I look in the mirror these days and don't recognise the face I see there sometimes. And, I recognise that at the pace I'm working at the moment, this is something, a 40-year-old would be pretty tired at the end of the week, I think. So I have to look and say I'm, 3 and a bit years away from being 70.
Yeah.
As bizarre as that sounds to me, that I'm not going to be able to continue. So I think the formation of the charity, the creation of the collaborative network, and having others take on roles within that is my way of being able to look, say, 5 years down the line and go, okay, we've got this in place. It's operating. It's working. Others are going to be able to continue the work. So yeah, I think I'm absolutely preparing myself for that. But right now, well, I've still got the energy and the mental capacity as well. Yeah. Just going at it.
Keep going. Yeah. What you're trying to achieve is significant and lasting change, and we can go into a situation feeling very positive and charged and ready to take on the world. But in that process, sometimes we learn lessons about what is actually possible in reality. Are there no bounds to the possibilities? Or do you think that there are limitations? And what have you learned in that process to kind of still keep that sense of hope and ambition and aspiration for what you're trying to achieve?
Really good question. Thank you for asking that. I think while I said those that, operate in this space that I'm affiliated with and work with, we absolutely passionately believe, not just hope, that there is this opportunity to see a significant downturn in suicide numbers. So while we hold that belief, I think we fundamentally know how that's going to be achieved. The challenge are the barriers along the way that inhibit that ability to do the things that you want to do, and that's frustrating. So I think for us, quite often, I could speak on behalf of the Jordan legacy, some others that I know as well, it's the kind of the silent wins in a way that we have along the way, and that for me could be just a message that I received from someone who said, "Look, you don't know me, but I've been following you for X amount of time." And I had, a wonderful message from a young man who first reached out to me in 2021, wanting to invite me on a podcast interview at the time, actually. And that we had a number of message exchanges on LinkedIn. He explained about his own struggles with mental health. And then he disappeared. We didn't hear anymore. And gosh, 4 years later, 5 years later, then he messaged me out of the blue and he said, "Look, you may not remember me, but," he said, "I just want to let you know just what a profound effect our conversations had at the time." He said, "I've since got myself together. I'm in a good place mentally." He said, "I got myself a really good job." He said, "I met the woman of my dreams and we got married. And I just wanted to let you know." And even now, gosh, I can feel that lump in my throat because I think, okay, we are making a difference then. We are. It might be at a micro level, but to that person, it matters more than anything else in the world. And yeah, wow, I didn't think I was going to get that profound, but it's yeah, pretty special, and that's the fuel,
Yeah,
and we
absolutely.
need that fuel because it is a tough gig. It's it's a really tough gig at times, and
Yeah, I can imagine.
I share very openly about that, but that's the fuel, really.
When you think about hope, we talked very briefly, touched on the word hope in the context of someone feeling suicidal. What does that word now mean to you?
Yeah, I think giving hope, and often talk about glimmers of hope. It's a line that I use at the end of every talk where I show a photograph of Jordan just shortly after his diagnosis in 2015. He'd gone out for a walk with his stepmom and I, and there was Jordan sitting on this gate with a big smile, looking up at the sky, a farmer's gate, and it's become quite an iconic photograph of Jordan. First time I've seen him smile in weeks.
Mm,
And I say, look, what we can do for somebody who's feeling suicidal, it's not about fixing them. I think this is, the important thing. You can't necessarily fix what's going on for someone, but if you can just give them a glimmer of hope,
mhm,
and that hope might be that you're the first person that's actually really just sat down and said, "Look, how are you really doing?"
mm,
Rather than that glib, "How are you doing?" "Oh, fine." "Okay, that's good." How are you really doing? That you just gave that little bit of time
mhm,
to somebody. It can be really as simple as that. So I think hope is comes in lots of glimmers, in little moments that accumulate, and that we just give time. I think to people that we're all time challenged.
mm,
We believe we are, at least anyway.
mm, mm,
We usually create our own time issues,
mhm,
to be honest. But just giving time to somebody is hope. That someone wants to listen to me, someone wants to hear my story, what I'm going through, and then it is about, once we've listened, kind of knowing where to signpost them to for more in depth and maybe more professional help as well. But
mm,
that comes through education.
mm.
That comes through education as well. So I think hope is an accumulation of glimmers, really.
Idea of giving time to people, something I've observed, and I don't know whether my observation's right or not, but and in terms of the statistics and the trends, and it may be that the trends are changing, but that there more men are likely to take their lives at a particular time in their life. Is that my observation is that is it the case that because women, my perception is that they're good at asking one another how they are and they're checking in and having those conversations, that they're naturally supporting one another and preventing things from happening because they feel cared for and heard and listened to, and that men aren't as necessarily inclined towards doing that. I think that's changing. I have to say, I feel like in my own friendship group, I feel like there is a supportive network that perhaps wasn't as what it was. So I think things are
Yeah.
shifting. But do you think that could explain some of the variations in the
It
genders?
does. Without question, it does, Dean. And I think I'm glad you said you're seeing a shift in the change, because we are. We need to see a bigger shift. But inherently, yes, women enter the healthcare system much earlier on in their lives because of their physiology and what they have to go through. So they become more comfortable in talking to medical professionals about quite intimate things. Of course, men don't. They'll break their leg playing football, stick a plaster cast on it, and go down the pub and brag about it.
Mm.
So we're not particularly good. Women form very early on friendship circles that often they will have at least one, if not more, friends that become friends for life. That they stay with. They make the friends, and I'm stereotyping here a little bit, but invariably it'll be the mums that are at the school gates. Okay, we're seeing more dads, but it'll be the mums, and they'll form really good bonds, and then invite them back and the husbands for dinner. And it won't be the man that will do that.
No.
It'll be the women that create that. Men operate very, very differently, and I heard Professor Adrian Dunbar speak at a conference recently, and he was very humorous in some ways. And he just said this: he said, "Look, if you get a group of women together, and they come back and tell their husbands what's happened, they'll be able to tell everybody's name that they've just met, and they'll be able to talk about the kids and all that's going on with their lives." The man, on the other hand, would have been out with his friends. He knows he's had a good time, but he's absolutely no idea what they talked about. I just thought that kind of
true.
sums it up, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Still today, that rings very true, despite, as you say, we're seeing some change happening there. So we've still got a bit of work to do as blokes, I think. Yeah.
On the subject of talking and being honest, you have to do that every day now in your role as a charity leader, and it's obviously profoundly personal work. Did you have to prepare yourself for doing, or is that something that you're kind of naturally inclined towards doing already? Not only just talking about yourself, talking about this theme and the subject more generally, talking about the life of your son and the subject of suicide. Can you talk about that in any detail?
Yeah. I think it was something inherent in me that I was always going to be very open and transparent. As a family, we were very open about the nature of Jordan's death right from the outset. So when we had 2 funerals for Jordan in different locations, everyone knew what the cause of death was. That isn't always the case. Funeral services where there's been a death by suicide. So I think the fact that right from the beginning we were very open about this, and I think that's something that was just inherent in me.
Okay.
Anyway, and that has made that easier. For some people, it's been a really difficult journey. I know that do similar kind of work to me now, but just that being able to talk about it meant that there was several years before they stepped into this space, really.
I think I know the answer to this, but have there been moments where you felt that you couldn't keep talking about this and couldn't share the story? You shared what I describe as a beautiful moment where you speak regularly to Jordan through the photograph behind you. And I think there's something in that that's really profound. But are there moments where you feel you can't continue doing this and it's not good for you? I'm assuming it actually is good for you, and in one way or another.
Yeah, is it good for me? That's a really interesting question, because I just shared a post just in the last 24 hours on this very subject, really, because of the statistics that show that almost 90% of small charity owners have experienced mental health problems in a 12-month period. It's huge,
As a result
so,
of charity or prior to...
Yeah, just the pressures they're under running a charity.
Yeah.
And so I think there's never been a moment where I thought, I don't want to do this anymore. There have been moments where I've been exhausted, tired, frustrated. They've happened, and probably fleeting moments of, can I really carry on with doing this? But there's never been a serious moment where I've ever thought I would stop doing this.
In terms of that, there must also be a strain on you sort of emotionally. So how do you ensure that you're looking after yourself sort of practically and emotionally so that you can keep showing up and keep the same level of energy and the same intent behind what you're doing, the same level of authenticity and humility, if I may say? You've got a great deal of that as well in abundance. What you talked about earlier on about letting go of your ego, I think that really resonated with me. Yeah, so tell me a bit about what you do to ensure that you can sustain what you're doing.
Sustaining what I do is really important, because I do recognize that what I do is good for me on the one hand, good to keep me going, keep me focused with that sense of purpose. I'm also very aware of the potential for a cumulative effect of what I take on board every day, other people's issues and challenges. The bucket will only ever allow you to fill it so much. before it starts to pour over the edge. So I am conscious that I need to be aware of that. That there could come a point where it just creeps up on me one day, and the mind and the body and everything says, Steve, that's it. You've just taken on board too much, and your bucket is going to overflow now. So I think it's just about keeping a balance of, I work a lot of hours each week, but once kind of my home office door shuts at 6 o'clock at night, I may have been at my desk since 8, or been out doing whatever. That's it. I'm pretty well switching off. I know there's a glance at LinkedIn and stuff like that I shouldn't be doing, but I'm trying to get better at that. But I do my cycling. I'm really keen into my cycling. So I keep that up. I keep the weekends pretty free. I really do. And people know that continue to message over the weekend. I'm just not going to reply to you. I'm not going to do that. So I think having boundaries is really, really important. And increasingly, I'm recognizing that it's okay to say to someone, I'm not going to answer this now. I'll come back to you. And because I often receive so many messages through LinkedIn or whatever, quite often I'll share a message where I feel I'm getting to that overload. It just says, look, where people say, I'd love to have a call with you. I'd love to have a meeting. And I just say, yeah, I'd love to be able to do that too. Just right at this point, I'm not able to. I said, I also have to be conscious of my own well-being and mental health. As soon as you put that in a message, people go, well done. I absolutely get it. So I think it's just about being really honest with people.
I think everybody wants to say that, don't they, in one way or another at some point. I think everybody wants
I
to.
just say it. Yeah.
Well,
you say it in a nice way. You say it with humility. The minute you start saying, I'm sorry, I'm really busy, I don't have time to speak to you, then you shouldn't be doing what you're doing, to be honest. But yeah, that's my way of kind of coping with things.
Do you think that your understanding of fatherhood and what fatherhood means and what it is and your purpose within that has changed fundamentally since Jordan's death? And in what way do you think it's changed?
Yeah, I kind of mentioned this, I think, a little earlier about being busy, my career all the time. And I think there's probably many people listening to this that this will resonate with. I think what we don't do enough is we don't spend the time with our children that we should be spending. We don't have those real kind of sit down conversations with them to see how they're really, really doing, what's going on for them. We rush them from one class to, from football to dance or whatever it might be. We get on with our busy lives invariably where there's two parents in the family, both are working, everyone's exhausted. And what we don't do is we don't make the time for families as we used to do, I don't think. So I think if I reflect and say, what would I do differently, or what would I hope I would do differently? Because we can all say these things and mean them and sound very sincere, but what I hope I would do, given that opportunity again, which I know I won't have, is just talk more, try and understand what's going on for them, and be there more instead of putting kind of career first, because I didn't expect what happened that day.
No,
it was never in my wildest dreams would I ever have thought that, and yeah, it came knocking on our door on December the 4th, 2019. So yeah, I think definitely my attitude towards parenthood has changed significantly. Yeah. Whether I've got better at it, I don't know. But my attitude and beliefs have changed. Yeah.
I think there's an education piece there for both parent and child, particularly older children, about giving more time for their parents and having those kind of conversations and being receptive to those conversations. Because similarly, children of a certain age become very busy and wrapped up in their own lives as well, and might not be that open to having conversations. But yeah, I think it's a two-way thing, isn't it, that conversation? But definitely as a parent, should be encouraged to do as much of that, I think, as we possibly can do. Thank you for that.
Definitely.
I'm going to move on to sort of the leadership side of things, particularly around One Voice and One Hope. I wanted to know what you've learned about leading a small CIC, soon to be a charity, in an area as vast and sensitive as suicide prevention, what can you say about that around sort of leadership?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think first of all, as well, I'd say that I'm dealing particularly with the collaborative network with a lot of people that are doing exactly what I'm doing. They're heads of charities or organisations. So in that respect, we're all very much on a. If there's a hierarchy, which we don't like to use, but if there was, we're all very much there. And here I am trying to influence the direction of this collaborative network and having to lead it on many
Mm,
occasions.
mm,
And that can be a challenge. But one of the things fundamentally that we introduced into that collaborative network very early on was a set of agreed values, and how
okay.
you referred to humility
Mm,
earlier. Humility is one of 5 core values we have, that we or I insist we live up to.
mm.
It's really interesting when I say I'm just thinking about the word humility and then saying I insist on it. I'm not sure if is that an oxymoron. I'm not sure,
Yeah, but I know
but
that you are humble within that. Yeah.
yeah, insist isn't the term really. It's not the appropriate term, but I ensure that through every meeting, through every communication, that I look at what I'm sending, I look at what I'm saying, and I look at those values. And the values we agreed were humility. We've mentioned, but it's respect
Mhm.
for one another and what we're doing.
Mhm.
It's trust, and trust can only be developed if we demonstrate trust in our behaviours and attitudes in the
Mhm.
first place. The other one is compassion.
Mhm.
And I think it's just remembering that when we're all in a room together and we're trying to come to some agreement on something, and things can get quite passionate
Mm,
and even heated at times,
mm,
that the people that are sitting in that room with you, most of them have been impacted by suicide, and some
mm,
of them, many of them, by direct loss to suicide. And we mustn't ever lose sight of that at all. So we have those 4 core values of respect, trust, compassion, and humility. But the fifth one is determination.
yeah.
Um, because if you don't have determination as that
Mm,
fifth value, you've just got a very nice bunch of people meeting regularly,
mm,
and that doesn't change the world.
mm,
Determination does. So, as I say, I do my best through every communication I share to think, am I living by these principles myself? Because only if I demonstrate those can I expect others, and can I challenge others
mm.
if they don't really. So, yeah, I've had to draw a lot of my past experience, but certainly those values are central to everything we do.
So, Steve, in terms of the theme itself, if you could change one thing in the wider system tomorrow, whether it's policy, culture, funding, what would you choose and why?
I think I'd like to see government more actively involved in suicide prevention. We've not had an actual designated suicide prevention minister since Theresa May's government. At the moment, suicide seems to get absorbed into mental health 10-year strategies. The new NHS 10-year plan, suicide gets 2 mentions in that 10-year strategy. And despite the efforts of many people that I work collaboratively with, from the Three Dads for Walking and Ian Russell and others, talking about suicide, we still don't feel they're taking it as seriously as we can do. And I wonder if part of that is that they don't honestly believe they can prevent it at the levels that we're talking about. So that is just subjective. That's a thought that I throw out there. So what I would like to see, and I'm very supportive of another bereaved father, Philip Perry, who I know. He is campaigning for there to be a public health campaign to reduce the stigma around suicide. Um, and if you think back to previous public health campaigns, 2 of the biggest probably in the memories of some people listening to this, one would be back in the 90s with the HIV/AIDS campaign, where we're losing, thousands of people to suicide deaths as a result of that campaign. We now see numbers in the hundreds
Mm,
dying rather than the thousands that we saw before. But millions were invested, hundreds of thousands of pounds in that campaign at the time, national media. And yet, even back then, suicide deaths would have been 3 or 4 times higher than deaths by HIV.
mm,
we think back in my lifetime to the 1970s and the extensive road safety campaigns for seatbelts, particularly, that worked. Still to this day, we're seeing road traffic accidents moving downwards statistically, suicide deaths moving upwards. So we know national public campaigns work. Here's a figure just to contemplate for everyone that's listening that we haven't talked about, because sometimes it sounds a little crass. Suicide deaths create a huge emotional toll on our society and those that experience suicide. So out of the 7,000 plus deaths of men, women, and children to suicide every year in the UK, each of those suicide deaths will impact on average 135 other people. That means that 945,000 single year are impacted in some way by a loss to suicide. There is an economic cost to each death by suicide of some £1.46 million. That means to our society, every single year, there is a cost due to deaths by suicide of £10 billion. What would it cost for a really effective public health campaign that, if that saved even 35 lives, let's say something like that, the cost would be significant. It would be absolutely huge. So I think one of the biggest changes is we need a government to take this really seriously and to put together a public health campaign that reaches all the homes in the country and educates them about what it is they need to be aware of and how to respond if they think somebody might be having suicidal thoughts. Really simple campaign. What are the 1, 2, 3 things that I can do today? We need that level of education. And at the moment, it's reliant on the third sector and charities to deliver that.
If someone listening right now is struggling or knows someone who is, what's one small concrete thing you'd encourage them to do today?
Yeah, there's 2 questions there, really, isn't it? Someone who's struggling, or someone who's struggling. The obvious thing is to say to someone who's struggling, let someone know. Tell somebody you're struggling. I think that's really important. It's not that easy for people, though. There's some great campaigns. It's okay to talk, and that suggests it's okay to open up and talk. But that's not always easy for people to do. But nevertheless, talk. Somebody will listen to you. That's really important. Don't leave it too long. So I think that's the first thing. Let someone know. Use the word suicide. I'm having suicidal thoughts. Reaching in, the same thing. It's okay to ask. You will not, despite the myth that's out there, plant the seed of suicide in someone's mind by using the word. If you have any concerns whatsoever, it is absolutely appropriate and the right thing to do to ask someone, can I ask you, are you having thoughts of suicide? There is more chance you'll save a life by asking that question than planting the seed in their mind, which all the research and evidence has proved is a myth. So those are the 2 things. It's okay to ask. It's okay to talk.
Thank you for that. And for anyone that wants to know more about your work, where should they go? How can they find you and the work that you're providing to support them?
Yeah, they'll find me, Steve Phillip, on LinkedIn. I do share a lot of what I do there, but really for a consolidation of all our work and what we're doing, that'll be through our website, and that is thejordanlegacy.com.
Right. And then just to finish off, Nelson, we have some light-hearted, quick fire round questions. And the first of those is tea or coffee, and how do you take it? You're just having a glass of water by the looks of it.
Yeah, now tea or coffee, you thought there'd be a simple answer to this question. So the routine is that it starts off with green tea with lemon in the morning,
Okay.
progresses to lemon and ginger at lunchtime,
Yeah.
peppermint tea in the evening, but a mid-morning coffee.
Mid-morning coffee. Great. Okay. And are you an early bird or a night owl?
Early bird, I think, really. Yeah, get to my desk as early as I can do, usually up by 6-ish in the morning. So, yeah, early bird. I flag in the evening. Yeah.
And what's one book, film, or song that's been a companion through this journey, and why?
Wow, through this journey. Yeah, as soon as you said film, I would have said Field of Dreams has always been my go-to film. Watched it so many times. Watched it with Jordan. Yeah, ball my eyes out every time towards the end of the film at a key moment. That's the film with Kevin Costner for anyone who hasn't watched it. So that's my kind of go-to film. Since that time, is there any one film, song, or book? Yeah, not one particular book. So I've read so many. There's some great standout books there. Yeah, there is a book to come to mind now, and it's Matt Haig, the author. Reasons to Stay Alive.
Okay.
I think is the right title of that book, but do double check there. Probably one of the very early books I read, and still think it's probably one of the most influential books as someone himself who was very close to ending his own life and has become an incredible author now. And that was a pretty influential book. Music-wise, yeah, all kinds of music, really, but a lot of Jordan's music that I listen to, and an artist not so well known in the UK maybe, but David Ryan Harris, an R&B singer from the States.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of his music, very much something Jordan would listen to.
And Steve, thank you so much for such a thoughtful, raw and grounded conversation, and for sharing your why so openly. You've taken us from unimaginable personal loss through to building the Jordan legacy, one voice, one hope, and partnerships that could reshape suicide prevention nationally. And you've given a clear sense of how grief can fuel purpose, how collaboration beats isolation, and what it really takes to lead in this space with resilience and that big word, hope. And to everyone listening, I hope this episode has prompted you to think differently about suicide, not as inevitable, but as preventable through conversations, system, and collective will. And if you found this conversation useful, please like, follow, and subscribe to the Night Owl Philanthropy podcast, What's Your Why, on your usual platforms, and share it with someone who cares about mental health, about suicide prevention, or charity leadership. Thank you all for listening, and until next time, do take care. Thank you very much, Steve.